I think we are live.
So,
All right.
hello.
Hello, everybody. I think we have a few people waiting on YouTube there. And I'm just going to verify that it's all good on Twitch. Perfect. All right. What day is it?
Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to YYC Dev. We have Daniel with us today. You've spoken with us before. Maybe not. I've known Daniel for a while. I like him for the most part. We get along.
Me too. I like me for the most part too.
So if you've never been here, we are a language and framework agnostic collaborative community project. So we're just a bunch of nerds. We like to hang out and talk about the things that we really like to do. And we strive to be a welcome environment for software developers of all skill levels. Before we start, there's always an open invitation to speak. In January, we will be hosting lightning talks. And so if you're interested in speaking for the first time, lightning talks are a really great way to get introduced because you only have to speak for 10 minutes. If you're interested in doing that or want to know more or worried, have questions, we'd be happy to guide you through to your first speaking engagement. So just reach out to us on Meetup and let's have a chat. I'd love to have you with us.
Lightning talks are great. They're really fun.
They are. It's like 10 minutes, super chill. It's a great way to get your feet wet into speaking. So I've known Daniel for a couple years now. I think I met him before he started coding.
It's true. So in the before times.
And so that is a fun Daniel fact. And I will let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Something I was curious about is, are we doing hanging out after in like Discord or something? Is there a link that will go out for chatting and questions?
Yeah, I can do that. I will share the Discord link for the Platform Calgary Discord, and we can hang out there after.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Because I'm gonna ignore everybody while I'm talking. Because as the numbers go up, I get more nervous. So I'm just gonna ignore you over there for a while, and I'll talk, and then we can talk after, and it'll be fun. But yeah, I'm Daniel. I do software code stuff. This is the title of my talk, which is Flail Less, Develop More. And the subtitle is Maturing from Coder to Software Developer. This is because it's YYC Dev and it's language and framework agnostic. I will be giving some examples in both JavaScript and Ruby. But if you are uncomfortable with either of those languages, the point isn't really about the code. It's about the principles and what we're going to learn from it. So I will make sure that we don't get lost anywhere along the way. And if you have any questions, please hang on to them so that I can chat with you about them at the end. I'm looking forward to that. And I hope everybody's having a great day. And thank you to Serene for hosting this as always and having me on to chat about some things that I have learned in my life. Okay, so I'm just going to set up, get started. The thesis, what am I here to talk to you about today? Our day-to-day practice as developers matters a lot. How we choose to interact with our regular workflow, how we sculpt and craft that is what is going to help us evolve and mature in our careers and become more proficient at this practice. The thing we want to cultivate is we want to cultivate a practice. We don't want to have a practice forced upon us, and don't want to have a practice forced upon us and be reactive to the environment that we're in. We want to cultivate a practice that we want. So I say be a gardener because I mean gardeners, when they start out, have an empty field and it's just dirt and there's nothing there. And they plant these seeds methodically and with tools and with a purpose, with an understanding that it will grow into something beautiful at the end. So they know why they're doing the thing that they're doing at the start. And that helps them, without seeing the result up front, trusting the process, gardening and growing that practice, cultivating it into something really beautiful. So we can do that by creating short feedback loops for ourselves as developers. The shorter the time between trying something and getting feedback on how that works, the quicker we can learn, the faster we can improve, the more things we can experience and try, the more mistakes we can make. To do that, we want to be thinking about how do we bias towards learning instead of churning. So by churn, I mean, if you've been coding for a while, the moment where you like, I don't understand anything that's happening, and now I'm going to throw spaghetti at the wall, or I'm going to just like kind of sit here and sigh, or like put my face in my hands for a while because I've been beaten by this code that I don't understand. That's the churning piece when we're lost. If we bias towards learning, finding moments of always looking for like, what don't I know here yet? That helps us have a shorter feedback loop, looking for those opportunities to learn. The other thing we should do is learn in public. The more people we can show our learning to, the better, because they can help us with understanding things in a deeper way. This is also known as failing in front of as many people as possible. This sucks. Like the having to learn means you have to admit you don't know things, and you have to show that you're valuable and a human being that makes mistakes. And all of us like to feel competent and like we know what we're talking about. So learning in public also means that you're going to fail in front of people, and that sucks. And it's just kind of a reality. But if you can become brave and do that, that will shorten your feedback loop a lot. It's going to really help. And then once you've felt that pain of learning in front of other people, giving that knowledge freely to others, sharing it around, helping other people learn those lessons will shorten their feedback loops as well. It'll cement what you know. It will help other people overcome those pain points. And all of that stuff just can help us in the long run. Why do we want short feedback loops? It's because we want to focus on the valuable things. And that sounds like it should be really intuitive or an easy thing to do. But there are people that spend literally their entire career trying to figure out what is valuable and what should we work on next. And I have some ideas about things that are valuable, but it's hard to know. And so with shorter feedback loops, we can find things that are valuable faster and in new environments that we haven't experienced yet. Implicitly, with focusing on what's valuable, is that I think we're going to be not focusing on what's clever. We want to avoid being clever for the sake of it, because I don't think cleverness brings us value. I'll give you some examples of that in a little bit. But when we feel like, ooh, I'm super superior, I'm really smart today, I totally get it, can sometimes be a really misleading feeling. It feels valuable, but maybe isn't. So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. And who is this talk for? I don't know who you are yet. I'm excited to chat with all of you after. I'm sure I've met a number of you already. But I've kind of shaped this talk in part for people who are early in their development career. I've been trying to use the word early career developer rather than junior developer. You'll probably hear me slip on that one. I think people come to development from all sorts of backgrounds. Like Serene said, she knew me before I coded at all. So I got a communications degree before software. We come from all kinds of different places and backgrounds. So I'm trying to work on early career. Maybe you're self-taught, or you came from a boot camp or post-secondary and you're a recent graduate. I think hopefully I can help give you I can shorten your feedback loops today and breeze through some things. And why do I think it's important to talk about these things? I didn't necessarily learn this until working with some really incredibly smart people. And the reason these things are important is because at the early career stage, like nothing is intuitive. Everything is super scary. We don't know what's relevant or not. I have to look at every line of code to make sense of what's going on. And so that's really scary and a wild place to be. And being able to focus on what's valuable is really hard when we're at this part of our career. We also kind of have this assumption that code is the solution to all of our problems. And I'm going to hopefully tell you that that's not the case. Maybe some of you are developers that are wanting to progress as leaders. That's why I'm here today. I think in order to become really good leaders, we have to be effective at mentorship, have to be able to communicate ideas, help other people overcome challenges and problems, shorten their feedback loops. It's also good for us to remember the beginner's mindset. I'm not that far away from being a fresh developer, but I've already lost some of the sense of what is it like to be overwhelmed by literally everything on my screen. And so getting to talk about some of these things helps me remember what that's about. And maybe somebody here just like has to work with developers, but you're not one yourself. Sorry about that. We can be like vaguely temperamental, and we're always talking about things like technical debt and I think if you're here, hopefully I can convey to you that having a culture of excellence is really, really important to having an effective developer team. If you can create a safe environment where people can be brave enough to go and fail in front of other people, and they won't be reprimanded, or there won't be negative personal consequences for making mistakes, supporting them and then overcoming those mistakes as a team, that's what's going to help our organizations really thrive. There's also kind of this mindset sometimes that like, oh, junior developers are like just cheaper and slightly slower senior developers. I'd like to break a little bit of that myth and why we can't just think about it that way. All of our early career developers can be senior developers one day, and I'll talk about how we get there. And so it wouldn't be a nerd talk if I didn't reference Star Wars once. So in some of the new Star Wars, we get to see Luke Skywalker as an old man. If you don't watch Star Wars, that's totally fine. He's this old wizard who's kind of like Merlin from fairy tales. And in these new movies, he's been isolating. He's like hidden away from the world. And the main character of the story shows up and is excited to like learn from him, become his student. And she brings him his lightsaber. It's a magic sword. And us as an audience, maybe remember Luke Skywalker using this lightsaber in the old movies. And it's really important to us, this tool that she brings to Luke Skywalker. And the first thing that happens when she arrives is he completely just throws away the lightsaber. He doesn't give a heck about that thing. That thing isn't important to him anymore whatsoever. He's ascended the importance of this tool that he utilizes. And I think this is a really good example of somebody who is a senior developer understands the value of the tool that he has and doesn't respect it the same way. So, quote, I'm going to throw a couple quotes at you. In order not to confuse titles with expectations that are fuzzy, sometimes I'll refer to engineering maturity. I expect a senior developer to be a mature engineer. This is from an article called On Being a Senior Engineer by John Allspaw, which is really excellent. Please do go read it. I'm stealing a few ideas from that for this today. The title is kind of wild, right? Like, what is a senior? What is if we can't say that a junior is just a slower senior developer, what can we say? So I think maturity is a big piece of it, and some of the ways that we can understand what those developers are doing is by the way they acquire skills and the level of skill acquisition that they are at. I have a sip of water because now I've been talking for a couple of minutes. Can I have a dry throat? So skill acquisition. There's another thing I'm going to throw at you called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. It is a sort of contested model, but I think it's a really easy thing for us to understand and intuitively understand. So I'm going to use it today. It's not perfect, but I think it makes sense. So as we start learning something new, we begin as this like total novice. And that's the bottom here. When we're working with things, we have to really rely on rules, blindly follow rules, because we don't really understand what it is that we're working in yet. When we look at something, we have to consider all of the stuff in front of us because we don't really know what's relevant. And then we're participating with something in a very detached way because we don't know what the whole system looks like. So if I'm new to some code, I have to follow rules about like this. How do I use the syntax of JavaScript or HTML tags? And I don't know which lines of it are relevant to the problem I'm solving. And I don't understand the system, so I can only look at it from the outside. And as we grow in our understanding and become more advanced in our career, we start recognizing like, okay, I used this rule before, but it kind of doesn't apply here, and I can do this other thing, or I learned bigger rules, or I'll talk about like other stuff that like we lean on as intermediate developers or senior developers that are just bigger sets of rules that are more complicated, and we can a little more easily narrow down into like what's the relevant part of the code that I'm looking at. I know it's not related to this, it's over here somewhere. And as we explore the system more, we become more engrossed in it. We understand more of how it works. We've mapped out more of it in our mind. And so we start having more of an intuition for what's relevant, but also what will impact by making changes. We can recognize that we're part of the system that's going on. And at the level of expertise, everything is intuition. I've met many senior devs, including Serene, who just looks at a problem and is like, thinking in my brain for like 6 seconds, and then they go, oh, this is the exact answer. And it's really wild to see. And I think that's why we can't just say that juniors are slower developers. There's rule sets and experiences and things that they've tried and failed, and they've learned that publicly. And I think something I didn't say before, but wanted to add in, was that if you're failing in front of another person, or if somebody is teaching you something, they've failed at it before. So I have failed at all of these things. And if I can learn these things, I think you can as well. So moving towards some code. If I'm a novice developer, brand new at a bootcamp or in my bootcamp, one of the things that they told us a lot was the dry principle. We want dry code. Don't repeat yourself is the number one rule that we are kind of taught at the beginning. And we have to follow that blindly because we don't really understand anything about working in bigger software systems or in code that isn't just like 10 lines that does some addition or some subtraction. And so, a junior developer might come out of their bootcamp, and the first thing they'll do is put their editor into light mode so that they can upset everybody watching this presentation. And maybe they're working with some React. So if you're not familiar with React, it is a combination of like JavaScript and HTML stuff. So at the top of this, we have a JavaScript function, and at the bottom, we're returning a chunk of HTML that will be rendered on the screen. And this is probably something that I did as a brand new dev, where I said, yes, okay, I must make a collection of different users that show up. And I've been handed these users into this user panel as a prop, and I will hard code all these classes. I have a div that I will style with flex row and some margin. And then I will hard code the source of this image in here because that's the user's profile. And I'll just grab the first user out of the users array that is given to us and that kind of thing. And so we tell juniors and we tell novice developers, don't repeat yourself. Let's programmatically do that. Okay, so we maybe move towards doing something like this, where we map through the array of users and return a collection of HTML. We only write that one time. But the important thing is that, we didn't tell the novice, don't use the hard coding to get specific elements out of an array. We probably do tell them that, but if we tell them don't repeat yourself, implicitly that gives us a lot of value. We get the wins of not hard coding. We get the wins of making some small abstractions so that this is a little bit more reusable. And so that's a really valuable rule to follow. It gets us 80% of the way to doing something reasonably good. That's really awesome. As we grow, we recognize, okay, maybe don't repeat yourself isn't a perfect rule, and we shouldn't follow it blindly and at all times with no repercussions. We start intuiting when it's appropriate and when it's not, to pull out the don't repeat yourself principle. Okay, so then maybe as we move on and grow in our understanding of how to use React, we move on to a principle called abstract. We should abstract things away and understand that everything has one purpose. So we have our users panel thing, and we're pretty good. So we mapped through the users instead of hard coding everything. But if we want to abstract this, we're recognizing that, okay, this users map, it has to understand a lot about what makes up a user. They have an avatar link and they have a name, and I have to know what to do with those things. I don't think it's the responsibility of the user panel. So let's abstract that away and hide that complexity somewhere else. And maybe we do something like this, where we make another React component that its whole purpose is to decide how to show the user's profile picture and where to put it in comparison to their name. And I think this is nicer. It's certainly a lot shorter. It's really easy to read. But the novice developer is like, what? What are you talking about? The users panel, it only does one thing. It doesn't do anything. It just passes things along. Yes, that's exactly right. As we grow in our intuition, we recognize that the user's panel has a responsibility that's different from showing each user. It's going to start collecting some context about things that happen at this level. And it should know how to ask for user profiles to be shown, but maybe not know how to do it itself. And so we get more intuition about how do we format things? How do we fit things together? What part of the system am I working in? What's relevant here? At this layer now, what's relevant is only the user and how to put the user somewhere that it can be shown to us in our HTML. Okay, as we move up more, we start putting on more complicated rule sets. We start applying things like in object-oriented programming, composition over inheritance. We start pulling out things called design patterns, or we use things like service classes or plain old Ruby objects or that kind of stuff. And if you don't know what these mean, that's okay. You will learn them. Maybe you'll go Google them after this chat. And suffice to say that they're just more complicated rules like don't repeat yourself or you should abstract things that we apply to bigger pieces of problems. And there's still this acquisition where you might be really good at knowing a few design patterns to pull out, but you might use them at the wrong time, or you'll treat your service classes poorly. And I'm going to give you an example of that shortly. But so as we go up, we recognize like, okay, I can use a service class here because that'll help me keep a relevant focus and it'll isolate it from the rest of the system or only impact it in a certain way. And we get more intuition about which ones apply. So of course, as a brand new developer who's new to this, where we have to think about literally every line of code, we don't know the rules that apply. We can't go fast and we can't make good decisions and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And so we want short feedback loops so we can make as many of those as we possibly can as quickly as we can to increase the speed at which we're growing. So when we've ascended to our senior developerhood, we stop thinking about those tools the same way. We don't consider, we would consider don't repeat yourself to be a very flawed rule to follow blindly at all times. It's a good rule, but there are times where we should break it, and knowing when to break the rules is part of that intuition. So a senior dev is somebody who doesn't value those tools the same way that you do. They're going to execute the requirements or the code that they're trying to build, but they're going to be really pessimistic about what they're pulling to bear. They're going to use sharp knives very carefully. And they reject any of the implicit value that they might have. They don't do things because they feel like, I'm so smart, I can solve this problem. Or they don't assume that their own code is really magical and is the exact right answer. They reject that anything has implicit value and work towards using the right thing or following their intuition or being challenged on what they're working on. And they just like throw away things willy-nilly, which when we're new sounds really scary and hard, but we can get there. Okay, so it's time for me to now be embarrassed and learn in front of everybody. I did something really clever. At least I thought I did something really clever. I was working on some code and I thought I thought, okay, I need to build some fruit. I have some fruit thing here, and I knew an example that kind of matched it. And I thought, oh, these two things, I've seen this pattern before. That's kind of cool. And what I'm going to show you is that the second thing wasn't actually the same. It was secretly a grapefruit. At this point, I am going to talk about some more, maybe not super beginner friendly Ruby stuff. If that washes over you, feel free to, it's okay. I will summarize again at the end. I can answer questions about it after. And the real point is the principle of I wasn't comparing the right thing. So I will summarize at the end if this is unfamiliar territory for you. No worries at all. If you are familiar with Ruby and Rails, you've probably seen a controller that might look something like this. In my example app that I'm showing you here, we are working with carrot cake. My favorite cake. I have it every year for my birthday. I cannot be shamed, and I will take no questions. The carrot cake, we'll talk about the code. So in our controller, we have a create method, which lets us create new versions of a carrot cake. In this one, we're saying call for the carrot cake bakery. And if the cake is successfully baked, we'll tell the user that with a response. Otherwise, we'll just say it's an unsuccessful response. Then down on line 12, we see some parameters. So we can say like, okay, what date should the cake be created? What size is our cake? Who do I call to pick up the cake? And we permit things like, did they have any allergies or special requests, or that kind of thing. You might be confused about this like line 3 thing. Something like carrotcake.create might be more familiar to you, where we're directly working with a model. I mentioned service classes before, and this is a pretty common pattern for those. We have something called a carrot cake bakery, which packages up everything that has to do with the carrot cake itself, and we can just ask for things blindly. Okay, so I was asked to improve our error handling on this endpoint. And so I did some pseudocoding here that kind of represented the requirements. We needed to check if it was an unbakeable cake. If we couldn't bake it, maybe they had allergy, maybe they're allergic to carrots. We can't do that. Or they requested bananas instead of carrots in the cake. We can't do that. So we need to rule that out. We should log an error. We should create a record that we couldn't do this cake maybe, and we should send an invalid response to the user. Equally, we should also check if the bakery is open before we try this. We should log an error, and then we should send the bakery as an open response to our users so they know. And then we can carry on with the rest of it. So you need some error handling up front. The rest of that is all the same. And so I thought, I have seen something like this before. We're getting a lot of different error situations in our controller. I'm working with a service class. And I thought, I want this to be cleaner. We're starting to get to a lot of business logic in our controller. It has to make a lot of decisions on our behalf about what's going on. And so I wanted to try to tidy this up a little bit so we didn't have as long of a method for creating a piece of carrot cake. And I had remembered seeing this thing in a controller somewhere called rescue from, and they gave it this like weird looking thing, and then also a with symbol called handle bakery error. And when we looked at that, it was like, oh, okay, this is a method that can take in a particular exception or a particular error and handle that for us. I thought, well, that sounds great. I can move the actual response to an error out of my controller, and I can make this all really clean and pretty if I copy this. So I went and I did some blind pattern matching, and I said, okay, let's we'll make our custom error. Maybe there's a malfunction in the oven, and so we got to carry on. And the example I copied kind of did something like this. It was a carrot cake bakery class, which was a wrapper. There's a wrapper around an external API. So the whole point of one of these wrappers is to handle asking an external API for things on our behalf. So we don't have to think about that when we actually want to order the cake. I can just say carrotcakebakery.call, hand in some parameters, and it internally will take care of all the cool stuff. And this is the thing I was copying. It sends a request on line 59 to carrotcakeforlife.com, best website of all time, and gives us a response back. We handle that with some just a REST client that makes a post request, and we ask the Carrot Cake Bakery external service. And then this isn't exactly accurate, but close enough where in this example I was following, if there was an unsuccessful response, it would raise an error. It would raise this oven malfunction on line 62 if the response was not successful. Otherwise, we just gave the response back. I thought, yes, this is the pattern I shall copy, and everything will be very clever and very clean in my controller, and I will love this. And then I looked a little further, and they did something else that was really cool. They didn't even put the definition of how to handle the error directly in the controller. They wrapped it up in something called a module. And so we have our line 34 says rescue from, that was what I showed you before. And this all gets bundled into something that gets attached to our controller. So our handle bakery error method, which does our logging that meets our requirements and sends a particular error response to our user, which meets our requirements, all also gets pulled out of the controller itself. And I thought, yes, this is beautiful. I will be able to come back to our Carrot Cake Bakery controller. I'll look at this requirement, and it won't even be inside of our create method. The method itself will just say def create. We could we haven't handled that other one yet, so we'll leave that there. Carrotcakebakery.call, the errors get magically handled by this line 2 include carrot cake bakery errors. Oh, it's just beautiful. It's so clean. It's so small. And we can also consider that moving the is open check into our carrot cake bakery errors so that we're down back to just like 2 lines of code again. Or I guess there's more in line 12, but there's a very few lines of code here. It felt very good. I felt very smart doing this, stealing this pattern. There was a problem, obviously. I told you that I embarrassed myself. So unfortunately, the internals of the carrot cake bakery, it was not a wrapper for an external API. All it was doing was wrapping up our internal model for carrot cakes. It was much closer to the carrot cake.create style. This is to keep consistency on our code base. We wanted everything to be in a service class. People would disagree if that's a good idea or not, but this was the convention on the team, and so we followed that. And inside, I saw, oh, okay, we're doing some things, but I really like this pattern that moves all the errors out of my controller. So I'm just gonna, this isn't the same. It's working with an internal model. I'm still gonna do the cool thing. I'm gonna change our validation to raise an error if there is, if for some reason our cake isn't valid, if they're allergic to it or that kind of thing. And I thought, yep, that's great, super good. Our controller is super clean. Everything looks really awesome. We love this. Everything's fun. I'm super clever. I'm really good at my job. And I was about to set up a PR, and I thought, okay, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should double check. Am I on the right path here? And so I made a mistake where, as I asked some colleagues for some feedback about this idea, I said, hey, I have this idea. I think it's good because of this reason. What do you guys think? The thing that I had overlooked a little bit was that the original implementation, this wrapper class, was expecting particular responses. It knew that the API could give us a 200 response or a 401 response, and that was it. I had said success only, or I had interpreted success only. So I overlooked this piece, and that's important because they were explicitly saying, if something unexpected happens with this external API, we will raise an error. But I blindly charged past that and looked for some feedback. I applied that pattern to this other solution, which, as my colleague said, was a bad idea. Raising errors can be really problematic and challenging if we aren't expecting it. So it violated the principle of how we would expect an internal model to work. We wouldn't expect a model that we should know it's invalid to raise an error. That's not good practice, and it would have surprised other people on the team. And I definitely fell on my face in trying to enforce this other pattern because it felt clever. So what did we do instead? I think there's a real power in understanding when something is like something else. And I realized that, okay, the service class, even if it wasn't dealing with a model under the hood, what we really wanted to do was do validations. We wanted to check, does this model work? Yes or no? Can I make a carrot cake with bananas instead of carrots? And if the answer is no, then we should use our traditional error handling and other tools for that. So instead, I did the solution that my colleagues helped point me towards was that we stole from Rails the validation model, active model validations, which you can apply on any class that you want. You don't have to use an actual database model. And then we got it to validate rather than raise an error. And so once we were able to add those errors, that helped us more intuitively navigate what was going on inside the controller. It helped me tidy things up a little bit. It still kept the what to do with errors inside, or it kept the creation of an error sort of state inside of our service class, and also didn't violate our expectations about how the code worked. You can talk about this more if you're interested in how like active model validations work and stuff. But for now, I would like to move back to, if I've lost you, welcome back. I'm going to summarize now, and that's totally fine. what happened? I didn't accurately describe what I was working on, and I didn't attend to the specific pieces. I wasn't able to understand what was relevant to the problem I was solving. And so we can do things like make really wild comparisons. Some of the developers I look up to the most are able to say like, oh, this is like that other thing. This feature that we're building, it's like a wheel of cheese. This service class is like a wheel of cheese. And that sounds like super weird. What are you talking about? Well, okay. We're using this thing to hold a collection of milk until the milk is ready for us. Okay, gotta mature the cheese, use the cheese, that kind of thing. So, okay, we have a piece of code that holds other stuff until it's ready for us. Okay. And then once it's ready, we shouldn't eat a lot of cheese at one time. You're gonna get an upset tummy, other issues of eating a lot of cheese. And so we get some good allegorical rules. And if we can start being creative in how we describe the things that we're doing, it can help us understand what we're actually trying to solve, and then put some good code enforcement around that, or follow some rules. And that can also help us understand what's relevant and what's not if we get a really good allegory to what we're working with. And then, maybe there's another rule of like taking a few thin slices is the best way to make a grilled cheese. I'm really beating this to death. I know it's cheesy, but I feel great. This type of thing is really challenging. Allegories are really hard, but I think they can be a really powerful tool for us to understand the problem domain that we're working with. So what did I do wrong in my crazy example? I treated two things the same that were different. I treated oranges like grapefruits and overlooked the piece that was different. And then I broke a convention because of it. Don't raise an error unless something unexpected happens, or raise errors only when unexpected things happen is the convention in what we're working with. And so by breaking that, other developers would have been like really confused and probably mad at me. Future me probably would have been mad at myself for making that mistake. And this, as I'm learning and growing, raising errors only when unexpected things happen, I can only apply that to Ruby on Rails for today. There are other languages or frameworks or paradigms where that does not apply. So don't take this as gospel. This is very situational knowledge that I have learned. And I now have some intuition around, okay, raising errors in this way is good, raising errors in that way is bad. And that's a piece of my own growth that we're going through. What I did right, and I think the most valuable pieces that I can share with you, because I want you to copy these things. I started by stealing a solution from existing code. That was really good. I looked at something else that existed and understood the pattern enough to replicate it and duplicate. And that helped me a lot. I also did a really quick implementation with tests to try it out, test it, take it for a test drive, see how it felt, help me understand why it was clever and why it worked well. I think that pattern is really good on external wrappers of raising errors when unexpected things happen. That helps us do things really well. And I got to feel why, because I copied. And then the last thing I did was that I showed my solution to my peers publicly and got public feedback. And I failed and fell on my face really quickly in front of people that were a lot smarter than me. And that's good because they helped me get towards a better path really quickly. And then as soon as they did and I understood why, I dropped my idea like a hot potato. I didn't hang on to it. I threw away that idea and said, yes, this is no longer right for the situation. And I got rid of it. I wasn't attached to the thing. I threw away my lightsaber as soon as I realized that it wasn't valuable. It wasn't a bad idea. It just wasn't a good idea for what I was building at the time. And the more we can understand these things, why things are good, why things are bad in this context, the more we understand our intuition, the more we sculpt that finely crafted understanding of the system we're working within, when things apply and when they don't, what's relevant to the problem that we're solving. Okay, if you are looking to improve your practices, what kinds of practices should we be incorporating as part of this understanding that we want to shorten our feedback loops and build our intuition, improve those pieces of our practice? If you're an early career developer, some of the things that I can tell you to do are don't run your code until you have a hypothesis. The first thing that happens when people start churning is they just like hit run or refresh, or they just see what happens. And that's when we're not thinking anymore. We're not learning anything about what's happening if we don't have a hypothesis. You should always say, I think this will happen when my code says this, because that makes us learn when we're wrong. If you immediately are wrong, you'll know it, and you'll feel that pain immediately by yourself without even having to embarrass yourself in front of other people. So having that hypothesis can help you stay in that bias to learn, not to churn mode. Part 2 of this is fall in love with errors. I think especially at the start, it can feel really overwhelming when things don't work. It's like, it feels scary. It's like, it's broken and it will never be okay again. I promise you it will. And the more you can love errors that you see, the more they will teach you, the more they will point you in the right direction of what you're actually trying to do. And they'll keep you on the correct rails towards the path that you want. The better you can be about loving errors, I think the more satisfied with this job you will become. And then when you go for a walk when you start changing things randomly. This is just like point 1 again. Don't run your code until you have a hypothesis. And if you're running your code without a hypothesis, take a 5-minute break, go for a walk. Let your mind relax, and let go of some of the things that feel relevant but maybe aren't and you're stuck on. It can really help unstuck us. The other thing I want to tell you is to have a development ideology. If you can describe your practice with an ideology, as a rule set, it's just a really prescriptive set of rules that other people think work. And there will come a time as you grow where those no longer apply. But at the start, having an ideology and a set of rules for how to do your practice can be really impactful and get you 80% of the way to being really good at this. And it's like, don't repeat yourself on steroids. So you have all these acronyms: TDD, BDD, EDD, ATD. TDD stands for test-driven development. I'm a huge proponent of it, which is why I now work at a company called TestDouble, but also was able to work with Serene at PixelTree and make test-driven development part of our practice. Other people fall more into like a behavior-driven development. And then I add these other acronyms, and now I can't remember what they are. Oh, error-driven development, EDD, that's another one. And then I think acceptance test-driven development or something like that. There's like all kinds of things like this, practices that you can apply to how you're doing things. I love TDD. I don't use it all the time. But start poking around at some of these development ideologies and rule sets for how to interact with your code. And it will take you a really long way to understanding, building intuition, and figuring out what's relevant. Part of this challenge with a lot of these things too is that we feel like we have to like earn titles, like a job title. If you're here, you're a developer, you've written some code, and so first you have to decide that you are that thing, and then you learn how to do the thing really well. And some people decide that it's not for them and leave. But if you are committed to it, I think being confident in deciding that you are something. I'm a test-driven developer, and then you learn how to do that thing can help propel you with some confidence to overcome some imposter syndrome that comes early on. If you like TDD, can highly recommend it. We can talk about it more. Lean on your tests. If you don't use TDD, they might be in the browser. You might be refreshing the page to see what happens. You might be seeing errors all over the place. Whatever your test is, testing your hypothesis, that is what you should lean on really heavily. That will help you and help your practice. Okay. I put this slide in here. Delete code like whenever possible. Don't hang on to things. Throw it away when it no longer serves a purpose. Please delete stuff. Delete unhelpful comments. Delete. Don't hang on to things. Use other tools to help you remember those things. Don't be attached to your idea. The more zen we can become about letting go of things, the better. And the more we can delete our own code, beautiful. So important that it has to do with spinning. Okay, so maybe we're moving more toward like advanced beginnerhood. You should delete the idea that, oh, this code I'm reading is garbage from your dictionary. It's really unhelpful. In part because I've experienced some test suite in test-driven development. I've experienced things where I looked and I was like, what is happening? I don't understand what's going on. This doesn't make sense to me. It's garbage. And that turned my brain off. I wasn't able to engage with it and think about it critically. And as I learned more, I realized, oh, this is just new to me, and it enables me to do different things that I didn't understand before. So if we instantly throw away things because we think they're crap, then we lose out on the opportunity to learn from whatever that thing is. There is some code that doesn't follow good conventions and breaks the rules in a bad way and is really unclear, has bad naming, doesn't make sense, hard codes that are values out of an array. And you can still learn things from that. You can still learn what pressure was that developer under to deliver this thing? What other problem were they working around that this was the solution for it? And so if we can get rid of that code's garbage from our brain, we get rid of the idea that, oh, I could do it better, which helps us engage with the system that we're in and understand the reasoning for it and build our intuition because we're thinking critically about it. Unless you're talking about your own code, you should call your own code shitty all the time. That's really good. And that's what is going to propel you, believing that your own stuff is garbage, is going to propel you to be like, hey, can other people look at this with me? That'd be really great. Killing your imposter syndrome is also another really important part of this stage, I think. When we're brand new, I think there's a lot of room for imposter syndrome. It is scary. It sucks. It's very common. And killing it is hard. I think that's part of why I'm here today as well, is the sharing things that I failed at, doing that really uncomfortable thing in front of other people, feeling that pain is how we grow. And the faster we can get comfortable doing that, the faster we can kill our imposter syndrome and keep growing and keep learning. Failing in front of others is as many people as possible. It hurts, it sucks, it feels bad. It makes us better at what we do. And it will help us build that intuition, which helps build our confidence in what we're doing. Also start leaning on, I want to do this because why? I think this idea is good because of this reason. And that's like a hypothesis, but for code design. So we're moving a step beyond, what does my code do now? What should it do? What is my code going to do when I run it? We're moving to, I think this is a good design because of this reason. And that lets us talk to other people about our code. They can say, oh, this is good code, but it's for a different reason than you thought. Or this is a good idea, but not in this context. That kind of thing can be really meaningful when we start talking about code with other people. The last part here. Get good at an IDE of some kind. It doesn't have to be a specific one. I use JetBrains. It's really awesome. I love it. Costs money. You don't have to use it. You can learn Vim. People do some really awesome stuff with that. You could really customize a VS Code tool. Get good at your hotkeys. Get your keybinds. Use things like refactoring tools. Building out your toolkit of the actual hardware that you're working on, the keyboard you're typing on, how to use that keyboard with a code editor. That's going to level you up big time. Lean on your tools really, really well. That's going to help you. Okay, if we're at that level of competence, this is where we can start like identifying our unknown unknowns. It's like, oh, I know about data modeling, but I don't know about this thing over here. And you can figure out what the name of that is so that you have a known unknown, things you can learn. Helps paint in the boundaries when we're at this stage. You can start learning things like design patterns or refactoring recipes. And those are prescriptive ways of handling problems that other people have felt helpful and overcoming pain points. They're bigger pattern or they're bigger rules to follow, like don't repeat yourself. So they're not always applicable, but they're good to learn and know. And then when we pull them out and they're the right tool, that feels really good. And this is also the part where we have to get better at communicating about what we're doing, talking about our code, talking about what went wrong with our code, talking about why we did it this way, good reviews of our code. Talking about your code is really important, but also talking about team priorities or the expectations of conventions on a project. politics of work things, like what gets done first, what gets done second, who did a good job here and there, giving kudos to your colleagues and being part of a team. I think you can't get beyond advanced beginner without becoming very good at communicating about your code. Being into the level of proficiency, so I'm going to kind of hurry up. I know I've been talking forever. When we get into that proficient level, you want to lean on the gas pedal and like resist being comfortable. I think it's easy to slip into like, oh, I know this really well, so I'm going to keep doing that thing. There's something to be said for being a depth first type of developer, but you still have to go further beyond the comfort zone of your knowledge. And so the harder we can lean on that gas and keep those feedback cycles short and try new things, the more proficient we can get, the more our intuition becomes well-rounded. Also getting messy and breaking stuff. We got to keep doing that as we're proficient. Often we can slip into doing it the right way or the way that we understand because we have enough intuition and engagement. But it's still important to try things and break things and learn new things. Sometimes you got to eat the whole wheel of cheese, even though I told you that you should use only a few slices for your sandwich. And this is where we start worrying about things like visibility and quality. By visibility, I mean visibility into what our code does, error handling and logging, good separations of concerns, things like quality about quality of the design, quality of how things fit together. Are we using the right recipes? That kind of stuff. Quality is very vague, and I won't talk more about that. But this is where our intuition about which tools to come out at this point. Cool. And then if you're an expert, I don't know, good luck, man. You're probably at the wrong talk. I'm not one. We can grow together, maybe. If you'd like to be an expert, though, one day, I think I talked about clever a few times. Replacing clever with clarity is the number one thing. Who am I being clever for? If we can make code that's so clear, other people feel clever, that's the win. That's the biggest win of all. Who am I being clever for? By making having code that is so clear that other people feel clever shortens our feedback loops. It shortens the feedback loops of others as well as us, makes our whole team better, makes us better at writing code, makes others better at writing code. These things are really good. Okay, I'll also share these later, but some cool things that I have learned from in the past 3 laws of TDD, refactoring.com, Refactoring Guru for refactoring and design patterns. Sandy Metz and her book, 99 Bottles of Object-Oriented Programming, really excellent. A talk called Therapeutic Refactoring, which is a big part of how I understood why refactoring and testing is so important to us. And thank you. That was a lot of things. And I appreciate you listening and your attention and time. And I hope that you've taken something from this. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. Please send me a message and tell me that you were here. If you're curious about other things I've said, you can check out the Test Level blog where I write some things sometimes about tech stuff, or my GitHub where you can see some old bad code examples of like Redux, which, nope, I'm not going to go there. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time and I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
You didn't want to get into a deep dive into Redux?
Right? It's not Redux Day today.
No? Well, it's too bad Nolan's not here.
We could go.
Yes, I don't think you could stop him. You know I'm right. I think, well, first of all, I'm really, really proud of how far you've come in 2 years.
Thank you. Me too. It's been fun.
Yeah, I mean, considering I think you started at Pixel Tree. Wait, how old's the epoxy hot dog? 2 years?
2 years. The epoxy hot dog on Reddit turned 2 in October.
Well, then it was 2 years ago when you started at Pixel Tree. I like that you can, the age of your software development career is the same as the Reddit
epoxy hot dog. Absolutely.
I think it's like in 2 years that you've forgotten that kind of initial junior flail where there's just like so much code flying at you and you don't know what to ignore is something that I think it's really tough to teach to newer developers because it's tough to know what's relevant and what's not relevant. especially if you're
that's
working in a legacy code base.
Yes. Oh, if you're in a big project, it's crazy hard to grapple with. Or you can go look at some open source code if you want that same experience and don't have a job where you have a big code base.
Yeah.
But I think the point of TDD or error-driven development, getting friendly with those errors, is that helps you at least start recognizing like where's the thing I should be looking at. Which is, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you this, Serene, but I know that maybe some other people listening that the testing piece of it can really help hone us in and focus us on what thing do I care about right now? What's relevant to what I'm working on?
I think this is a bit of a teaser to the next month's TDD talk.
Hey.
Tune in next time. I think, yes, people think that TDD is really just beneficial so that you have the tests, but it's actually a really good skill to help you to figure out what it is that you need to code. Because if you're trying to write a failing test and you don't know what your success criteria is, it becomes very apparent when you're unable to write that failing test. And so TDD is great for lots of things. Maintainability is only one of those benefits. So we will dive more into that next month.
Yeah, in December, there's another event about test-driven development. We will do some fun collaborative coding. We will write some tests and stuff together. We will practice it and hopefully make it a little less scary if you've never done it before.
I think we'll do that one on Zoom so we can have people kind of pitching in and stuff, and we'll do some live coding, and
that would be great.
We can pick some kata that I will panic and look at the last minute. That'll be perfect. I think, why don't we migrate over to Discord so people can kind of ask some questions. Like, we posted the Discord invite link in the chat earlier. If you guys want to ask Daniel some questions, we will be over there for, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes or whatever or so.
Sounds good. And thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Oh, yes. It was really nice to see what you've learned in the last couple of years and how much you've grown. All right. Everybody, we'll see you guys in Discord or next month. Have a good night.